What's going on, everybody? This is Josh Howell with Nerfherders Assemble. Today is July 14th, 2020, and 20 years ago today, on July 14th, 2000, 20th Century Fox put out the first movie in what would be their epic cinematic universe, a comic book cinematic universe that came out well before the Marvel MCU, and this was X-Men. Came out in 2000. Directed and written by, it's directed by Bryan Singer. Bryan Singer helped with the story, but it was a screenplay. It was by David Hayter, and this was obviously a different time. Those of us outside the industry was oblivious to Bryan Singer's off-camera things that he would do, the horrible things that he has been associated with now, and which is really sad because it kind of puts a stain on this. I remember a time where I was just like, if it's not a Bryan Singer X-Men film, I don't want to see it. Granted, we did get later X-Men films with the First Class films that were good, that weren't necessarily directed by Bryan Singer. I believe he was still involved, but so it's kind of sad that it kind of puts like a shadow on this. But growing up, X-Men was a huge deal for me. Now, a lot of people view X-Men as the first real serious comic book movie that ever got put out. Before the Avengers, before Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, you had X-Men. I don't agree with that. I believe that the first real commitment to a serious toned, serious and not just the tone of the movie, but in the production and in the work around it. As far as a comic book saga, was Blade, and that came out 2 years earlier than this in 1998. Sure, you can say that there were Batman films before then and Superman films before then, but in the modern age of comic book films, I believe that Blade really, opened doors for modern studios to say, hey, it doesn't have to be campy, it doesn't have to be silly. It can have some humor in it, but you can make a really good movie and bring in people that haven't read the comics and be successful. And so 20th Century Fox said, you know what, we're going to do a PG-13 X-Men movie, and it was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I remember loving it so much. I think we took a road trip that summer, and I saw the novelization book on the shelf at a gas station and begged my parents to get it. Did the same with X2 years later. The year after X-Men came out in 2001, the Ultimate X-Men comics came out, and I remember, this is volume 1 of my custom bound copies of that. I remember this comic series and just being in love with it so much. And I had watched the X-Men animated series growing up. It was my second favorite series on TV, next to the Batman animated series, and I loved it so much. I just loved X-Men. I loved everything it represented. Even back then, I could see the allegories and the analogies and for just equality, whether that was, equality based on skin or, sexual preference or, anything. It was about equality, and it was blown up into, this comic book world, but it was still very, grounded in things that, people have been dealing with since well before the X-Men comics ever existed, but certainly during and since the X-Men comics have existed. So X-Men 2000 was a big movie. I really, really loved it, and I thought that it would be fun to do a video reaction to it. It's certainly not a first reaction. I'm not going to be like what I'm sure will be 50 other videos on YouTube this week. First time reacting to X-Men. I'm not going to act like I've never seen it. I've definitely seen it, but I can't wait to watch it again. I don't think I've actually watched it, outside of a clip every once in a while seeing on Facebook or YouTube. I don't think I've actually watched it all the way through in maybe a decade. Certainly, I've seen it a few times. But maybe since like Days of Future Past came out, because I'm sure I did some type of old school like marathon of the X-Men films up to Days of Future Past. So yeah, I'm really excited to see this. I can't wait. So let's get into it.
But every few hundred millennia, evolution leaps forward.
Just his voice. Patrick Stewart, this was the perfect role for him. And, just as Ian McKellen was the perfect role for Magneto, and he also had Gandalf, Patrick Stewart has Jean-Luc Picard, and he had Professor X. Those roles, I just can't imagine without him.
To decide whether they want their children to be in school with music.
You always want to believe that this is the villain, but let's be real in the society that we live in.
And they are among us. We must know who they are, and above all, we must know what they can do.
And we must put them on a list, and we must cage them, and we must take away their rights. And I mean, that is, that's the whole point of this, right? It is, the superpowers are what makes it far-fetched, but the social issues are not far-fetched at all. His knives are bigger.
Get out of my bar, freak.
This always reminded me of like the T2 scene. Can't let you take the bike. Nice. It's crazy how good those claws look. In the first X-Men movie, 3 movies later, in X-Men Origins Wolverine, they looked really bad. Like, really bad. It's crazy. We're supposed to get better as the years go and the movies go on, not worse.
What is this place?
I always loved this
Anonymity
music.
is a mutant's first defense against the world's
Reminded
hostility.
me of Mighty Duck soundtrack. God, I love just even her voice was great. I miss Mystique as the vengeful villain. Like, I get it. Her character was sexualized a lot by, that she was always in the nude, and I know that all the actresses that's ever played her always had that issue. There's ways around that, but that's not what I was upset about in the newer movies where she's always in human form. It's not really what I was upset about. I was upset that they turned her into a good guy. Like, she was a vengeful person, and I miss that. Sure, you don't have to explain everything in a movie. I'm always a advocate for not over-explaining things. But how do you get someone who works, who can bend metal to his will, to this? Like, what is this? I'm waiting, guys. It's what? Let's see here. It's 47 minutes into this film, and I'm waiting to see something that doesn't hold up. And it still holds up 20 years later. How many films from 2000 can you say that hold up 20 years later in terms of graphics and everything? It's like, no, you just walk away. This was a ballsy move. But a boss move.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Seriously, though, I wonder how Disney will do it. That was kind of like a thing for X-Men films. Some of them would end with new costumes. Like, I think Apocalypse ended with new costumes that looked like, was it the Grant Morrison X-Men? It looked like one of the designs from the comics. And then, of course, by the time the next film came along, they weren't wearing those. So, I wonder how Disney will dress them. You gotta learn to fight better, buddy. Always loved that shot. That was a good shot.
Come on.
This is one thing that I appreciated. I think in the hands of other filmmakers or other writers, this might have been a kissing scene. Even if the two didn't end up together, the fact that Rhodes always kind of had this obsession with him in the comics, in the animated show, you know, I could have seen this being a kissing scene. And to their credit, it wasn't. It was him still treating her like, you know, someone that was young and fragile and not a love interest. And granted, Bryan Singer didn't, you know, write this. He was involved in the story, but, you know, especially coming from him, I could have seen that happening, being the predator that he is. But I really appreciated this. It was the one consistent thing that Wolverine always looked out for her like he said he would. So that was a good choice. And he looks rough. But not as rough as he's going to look in Logan. So there you have it. 20 years old, that movie still holds up. There was a few minor special effects that didn't look as good, but for the most part, that movie still holds up. Like I said, I don't think I've seen that all the way through nonstop for maybe 10 years, maybe less. If I did something for Days of Future Past, but I can't remember. I really liked it. I liked it when I first saw it. I like it still now. It's a great movie. It's a great first movie. You know, the sequels all had issues. I think E2 was a great X-Men United, depending on where you were in the world. I think that was a great movie. It introduced new characters, introduced Nightcrawler, which was fantastic. Everybody loved Nightcrawler. Loved Nightcrawler in the comics, loved Nightcrawler on screen, loved Nightcrawler in the animated series. He was a cool character. I still wish we would have gotten more backstory for some of the main characters. I mean, obviously we get a lot of Wolverine backstory. We get a lot of Jean Grey backstory. I think you know, we could have felt more and connected more with Cyclops and Storm. If we had gotten more of their backstories. It doesn't have to be a whole X-Men Origins movie with them, because that's just not necessary. But just a little bit, you know, just a little bit to show a little bit more who they are, to show their humanity, to show how they came to be. And, you know, I mean, sure, you got younger versions of them in the First Class movies. I didn't really care for those versions, but you know, this was a great first movie, and as problematic as the X-Men cinematic universe later became, it was still one of the first, you know, big cinematic universes out there. Sure, you had Star Wars and Star Trek and other things, but before the MCU, you had the X-Men cinematic universe, and it started with this film 20 years ago, and Disney now owns it, and they're going to do their own thing for sure. And most of the X-Men sequels were not great, but props to 20th Century Fox for letting this happen and for giving it time to breathe and for giving it the opportunity to, try to make more films. Just going down the line, X2 was great. X3 was not, but it had good moments. X-Men Origins Wolverine, again, it had interesting concepts. I liked seeing Wolverine and Sabretooth as brothers through the wars, but it was not a good film. Wolverine was a better film, still not a great film, but a better film. X-Men First Class was fantastic. Sure, it retconned some things. Sure, it didn't sync up with some things, appearance-wise and timeline-wise of certain characters, especially, Magneto and Professor X. But it was a great film. Let's see, Days of Future Past was a fantastic film. Again, didn't perfectly sync up with a lot of things, but it was a great film. And again, that was at a time where I was like, yes, Bryan Singer's coming back. And now, I'm sad for as much praise I gave that guy over the years. But Days of Future Past was a fantastic movie because it brought back these characters, it brought back that feel. It meshed the newer X-Men with the older X-Men, and it for the most part, it did it really well. Apocalypse was terrible. Ivan Ooze, as much as I love the actor, he's in Star Wars and other things. It was terrible. It was a terrible movie. Not good at all. And again, another example of younger characters that just didn't work very well compared to their older counterparts. And then Dark Phoenix, again, was just like, it was a redo of X3, written and directed by the same guy that wrote X3. So he told the same story twice and somehow got it worse the second time. I mean, to Dark Phoenix's credit, it made X3 look better. I could watch X3 more times than I could watch Apocalypse and Dark Phoenix, especially more times than Dark Phoenix. Not to mention, Dark Phoenix seemed to forget things that happened at the end of Apocalypse with Jean and her powers. It was weird. Like the first scene of Dark Phoenix retconned the last scene of Apocalypse. It made no sense at all. And then I forgot Logan. Logan was a fantastic movie. And I'm so glad we got that. I'm so glad that, again, to 20th Century Fox's credit, they allowed this universe to be taken that far. And it's fantastic. And it's all thanks to this movie. This movie 20 years ago was great, and now 20 years later is great. So I'm glad we got to watch this. I'm super happy to those of you that watched it with me. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're seeing an edited version of this. I actually recorded the entire thing, and Nerfherders Assemble is setting up a Patreon. I don't think we'll have it fully up and running by the time I post this because I actually watched this today. I could have watched this a couple weeks earlier and gave myself time to edit and everything, but today is the 14th, and I'm going to get it up hopefully by tonight. But the Patreon full viewing of this, I will get it up to Patreon, but we're still setting up some things. So be on the lookout for that. This will be among the full recordings. Pretty much every reaction I'm going to do now, I'm going to save the whole reaction and upload it to Patreon. And then Seth's going to be doing some things too. So happy 20th anniversary, X-Men 2000. So glad that you exist. I'm a little anxious to see what Disney does with this property, but hopefully they will look back at this film and see a lot of the good things that it did and treat that property with respect. So thanks for joining me, and we will see you later.